First question I want to ask is, what would be your top recommendation for students who are interested in pursuing a career in the marketing or social media marketing world?
Well, the first place is, and obviously people are students taking your class, but you've got to understand that you have to be continuous student of the game. So if you want to be in marketing or especially social media marketing, really study what's going on. And one of the great tools that we use all the time that gives a great sense is the Facebook ad library. Anybody can access it for free. You just type Facebook ad library into Google, type in any page, and then you can look at the ads the companies are running. And you can kind of study how are they structuring their messages, not just look at the ad creative, but look at the landing page, like look at the click-through URLs and things of that nature. So if you really want to be in marketing or social media, just know that you have to be in this for the long term. Like I've been in the social media space for like 16 years now, and we're studying every day. Like me, my creative director, my team, we're passing ads back and forth, organic content, and looking at what other people are doing in the space. The other thing is I would say is become a master at understanding human behavior, psychology, communication. That's all the things that we implement. Like I study psychology and the subconscious mind, A, because I love it for myself, but B, there's so many amazing applications as it pertains to being a great marketer. If you want to look at an amazing documentary, it's free on YouTube. Look up Century of the Self. It's a PBS documentary. I think it's from like the 80s or 90s, but it's about Edward Bernays, the founder of PR. He was Sigmund Freud's nephew. They came over and created the first PR agency, I think back in like the 30s or 40s. But it's a real great basis for how much psychology plays into effective marketing and getting people to perform the actions that you want them to perform.
That's awesome. I appreciate that feedback. And I mean, that resonates in both your books, I think in every chapter. So that's great. What about the demand for social media marketing? I mean, is it a career field? Is it something they could pursue if they actually want to make a living out of it?
100% it is. We don't know what the long-term vision of social media is. That's going to be predicated based upon where the hardware goes. But for the foreseeable future, I mean, social media is around unless all of a sudden there's a huge jump in technology where social media is no longer needed. And the only thing that I see in that is when you look at like artificial intelligence and like what Elon Musk is doing with implanting chips in people's brains and, just like VR experiences and where that's going to go. But for the foreseeable future, like social media is going to be a huge part of marketing, in addition to the fact that if you stay in social media, you'll always be on the forefront of where things are going that you can really learn from.
That's awesome. That's a great segue to the next question. When should or shouldn't you engage with new platforms? And kind of one example is Clubhouse, but if there's any platforms you want to talk about, like when do you jump in? When do you not? How do you balance that?
Well, I think it's really a personal choice. And my personal perspective is I don't really touch platforms until they've amassed at least 500 million users because it doesn't, Clubhouse is obviously the hottest kid on the block right now, but we don't know what the foreseeable future happens with that. Like they built an amazing tool. Obviously they're gaining a lot of traction with the trendsetters, the billionaires, the celebrities, the athletes, but it's still to be seen of what that future holds. Hopefully it sustains and it continues to scale. I have some concerns about burnout, especially with the crowd that I know. I have personally chosen after testing it for a while to hold off on it just because I don't have that much time in my day to really dedicate towards it. And it's a platform you have to spend a lot of time. But where we decide is really focus on one platform at a time, get really good at that platform, and then you can diversify out. And typically we choose the platforms to focus on first based on what is the platform that we love, what is the platform that we use, because again, you have to become a student of that game and constantly be studying references, both high performers and low performers. And then from there, you can determine, okay, what's best for my business or my client's business based on the consumption behavior that happens. So for example, YouTube is much more long form consumption behavior. You can get people to dive in for very long periods of time. It's a little bit harder to crack because of the time intensive nature that it takes to produce that content, because typically YouTube wants to see at least 10 to 12-minute videos, versus you look at like TikTok is really hot right now. Very low barrier of entry. The algorithms are very favorable. But again, most of that content is not diving deep into the brand or deep into the person. So that's the second level that I look at when choosing the right platform.
Awesome. Great feedback. Thank you for that. What were some of the biggest lessons you learned when you published your first book? What was, maybe talk about the journey, talk about some takeaways that you had.
Well, I mean, first, publishers don't market your books. I knew that going in, but again, like it's kind of shocking how little they do. And again, I had to, like everything, I had to learn it from scratch, how to promote and sell books at scale. It took about a year to figure that out and about another year to really optimize it. And we're constantly optimizing it. But it taught us a lot about direct response marketing and advertising, because my background is really Fortune 500, companies, mainstream media, musicians, where our key KPI is just how do we generate as much awareness as possible, versus with a book, or any kind of direct response marketing. Yes, you want to have awareness, but really it's predicated about how many books can you put into the marketplace? How many books can you sell? So it's a completely different discipline in that. And that was a real big learning curve for me and my team.
Perfect. Can you talk about the balance between personal and business brand? I know that's a different answer for like influencers or people who they are their brand versus like a small, medium business. So can you talk about that balance between personal and professional?
In what respect?
So most of the students are working with small to medium business, and they're getting feedback from some of the owners that are like, look, I just want the business to be involved, but I don't want to have a personal presence. Do you see value in people having personal presence on social media, or can they just have a standalone business presence?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you can find examples of every which way being successful. It's, it's tough. Like if the owner of the business is very charismatic, provides value with that content, is not coming off as like sell, 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 then it can obviously work. But if you have owners that are not comfortable with it, they don't want to be they don't want to be a part of that brand, and they just want to be a company, then respect that as well. Don't try and force it. Now, the big part of working with small to medium sized businesses, especially with social media, is really defining like what are the key KPIs. Like, especially when you're talking about local businesses, is it just to drive leads, to drive customers and sales, which is a lot of times with small, medium-sized businesses, especially local businesses. In that case, what I really highly focus on is just paid media. Don't focus so much effort on organic, because organic can be tough. It's a lot of work to put in. And it doesn't always, just directly correlate to people dining in a restaurant or using a dry cleaner or whatever the core business may be. So that's another thing to take into consideration. If the business doesn't want to be, the owner doesn't want to be a personal brand or have their face shown, or they're really not interested in creating organic social content because of time or resources, then just go straight after paid media and just drive leads and consumers that way.
Perfect. Can you speak to, I know you have some examples of where having a personal network that's visible on social has benefited. So is there benefit to these students to go out there and build their social network?
I mean, yes, there is. I would just say, think about how much time it takes. It's not required. Like, I can just tell you, like, we built a social paid optimization firm and built it very quickly up to managing about 100 million a year in paid spend in less than 3 years. We had absolutely zero social presence. So we had a basic website. We didn't have any social channels. But we got very strategic about our outreach on LinkedIn, and we tapped into very specific pain points with very high profile executives at major companies and agencies, and grew quickly that way. So can you have value in building a social audience, and can it drive leads and business for you? Yes. But just know it's a lot of work. Like, and do you really want it? Do you enjoy that process of creating content? Are you willing to put in the work every day? If the answer is yes, then go for it. If the answer is no, it's totally fine. I don't want people to feel like they have to put pressure on themselves to have a big social audience or to be on social media if they want to focus elsewhere. You can find examples of people being ultra successful in many industries not using social media or putting their personal brand out there.
That's awesome. I think that's great feedback because I think so often they're pressured to think big and, play that kind of emotional game of growing. But I think you're right. There's so many success stories to the face-to-face interaction and being a true expert, right? Your network will feel that. So that's great. Thanks for that.
I mean, I definitely embrace the think big mentality, but that think big does not have to mean you generate a social profile for yourself. It can be in other ways, shapes, or form. And also just understand, am I cut out to be an entrepreneur, or should I go and work for another company? And that's a personal choice. And there's no right or wrong answer. If you don't feel like you want to be an entrepreneur and do that daily work and that daily grind, it's totally cool. Go work for a company and enjoy that process. I wish I had that mindset. It would make my life a lot easier sometimes.
Agreed.
But I just don't have that. I don't have that in me. It's not who I am. So really, when people give you advice, obviously listen to it, but it's also a very personal decision of what is the right direction for you.
Love that. Perfect. Next, I just wanted to do a hit list of some of the 2021 trends. I pulled these from a dozen different articles. So maybe I'll just throw a topic out there. And then if you just want to speak to it for a second or tell me if you want to pass, whatever, we'll just kind of get the list out. So first, impact of stories on social platforms.
In terms of reels and things like that, or narrative?
Yeah, the usage of them. Are they a big player? Should you pay attention? What's your thoughts on reels and stories?
Yeah, I mean, listen, what this, stories came about because Instagram wanted to take out Snapchat. Reels came about because they want to take out TikTok. Understand that it's a test for them. Understand that they will give you more reach in the beginning, because they're trying to take away audience from these other platforms. So yes, test it. Obviously, everything comes down to the content you're distributing through it to whether it's effective or not. Just because you use stories or just because you use reels doesn't mean you're going to be successful. All these platforms is predicated on what is the content you're putting through those features.
Awesome. How about live streaming and kind of how it's interacting on all the social platforms?
Live streaming is tough. There's obviously examples of people that kill it. There's a musician, Mark Ribier, amazing at lives, killing it. Harry Mack, another musician, killing it. Obviously Twitch. There's some people very successful with it, but it's hard. Just keeping people's attention live for a long period of time is not an easy task. You'll see some influencers that are amazing on YouTube or amazing Instagram, but then we go to live, it just completely falls flat. So is it a powerful and valuable platform? Absolutely. Again, it comes down to the content that you're putting through it and whether you should tackle it or not.
Love it. You already spoke to AR earlier a little bit, but could you talk about AR and maybe VR and if you see that playing a role in social in the near future?
Not in the next year. Again, the best place to start is to just look at hardware and go to conferences and things of that nature. VR and AR have been around for many, many years. There's been a lot of money invested into it, but it's just not there yet because the devices aren't scalable. So, the minute that your average iPhone can turn anything into an AR, VR experience that everybody has access to, that's where the real opportunity is. Now, that's not to say if you're interested in AR, VR, that you shouldn't go and work for a company, because it is probably the future. But I can't see it getting wide adoption for at least the next 3 to 5 years.
Perfect. Good feedback. You talk a lot about influencer marketing in your books, and obviously it's a critical piece of the puzzle. If you just want any new knowledge you want to shine on that or anything the students should think about when it comes to influencers? Yeah,
I mean, influencer marketing can be an extremely powerful tool or it could fail miserably. it just comes to testing, that some people think, oh, if I just get this influencer that has 10 million followers and post about my product or my company's product or my client's product, I'm going to be rich. It doesn't happen that way. It doesn't. You've got to test. And also, one of the biggest tips I can give is look at what the paid media strategy is behind the influencers. People get so caught up in just the organic reach of it that they fail to have a paid strategy behind it. So I'm advising on a movie right now that has an actor that has over 10 million followers, and all they did was organic. And I said, guys, listen, you're only, first off, reaching a small percentage with organic. Number two, there's just a spike and a drop off. And number three, typically you need to have a frequency of 6 or 7 before somebody purchases a product. So when we're working with influencers, we're always backfilling it with paid, and we're always testing before we invest too far in any direction.
Love that. And I like that you referenced the amount of touches in the sales process, because I think that's overlooked, right? It's not just one, it's multiple touches to get deals closed.
Yeah.
Awesome. Can you talk about regulations? I know there's been a lot of headlines lately on either, countries banning TikTok or people being banned from social platforms. How do you see that playing out? Is it going to impact the industry?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to talk about it because I try and avoid all of that. Is it definitely going to reshape social media? Yes, but it's tough to say in what way, because politics is such a tricky thing, and it's not always a logical thing. So it's hard to really, it's hard to say what's going to happen, because these are private companies, which people fail to really recognize when they're talking about free speech and all of that. Now, because they're so big, does that mean that the government shouldn't come in and regulate some things? That's up to kind of each individual person's opinion. I think that it's going to shift in some way, again, but with politics, and I'm not a politician, I don't deal a lot with politics. It's really hard to say. Do I think it's going to be a huge drastic change quickly? Probably not, especially now that the election is over. But who knows what the future brings? Anything could change on a dime. But even like when you look back at what happened with Cambridge Analytica and the first Trump election, there were changes made. Don't get me wrong, there were some changes made, but it wasn't drastic. Now, the big change is iOS update and how that's impacting attribution and media spend. I think that's the biggest shift and change. But the core fundamentals about how these platforms work is still there.
Awesome. Can you talk about user-generated content? I know it seems to be one of the hottest things. You talk about it in your book a few different ways. Maybe some tips or tricks or any sort of takeaway a student should think about.
In what respect of user-generated?
It's just a big topic. So anything, your book talks about a lot. So is there anything new you guys are experimenting with it, or something maybe they should look at?
The biggest thing is really understanding how to capture that attention in the first 3 seconds, which my second book, Hook Point's, all about. So I don't particularly look at content in the perspective of whether it's user generated or produced. We look at it as how are we positioning it to stand out? Like one of the things that we're actively involved in investing heavily in is visual effects as a pattern interruption to grab that attention. But I will say that there is an overemphasis on production value. And that's where most companies go wrong, or most brands, is they try and make something too fancy, or they're focusing on like color palettes or visuals or like high-end lighting or things of that nature, where it really doesn't move the needle. In some cases, it can work against you.
Awesome. Some great takeaways there. How about communities and leveraging communities for marketing or some of that one-on-one personalization? Any tips, anything you guys are doing in communities?
Yeah, we advise a lot of our clients that, if they're starting out, is always go where the traffic is. And Facebook groups can be a great asset if you know how to tap into them. Obviously, when you're going to communities, you just need to make sure that you're going in with a value-based mindset, understanding the greatest pain points and challenges of those communities, so that you can be seen as somebody that's bringing value instead of somebody that's coming in and trying to sell. The minute a community sees that you're trying to sell them on something, they're going to be turned off right away, and it could even go, backlash against you. So if you're tapping into communities and it is a, a great source of traffic, just make sure to really take a step back and understand, why am I inserting myself into this conversation? What is the value and the greatest pain point that I can solve for the members of this community, and structure your communication and content around that.
Awesome. How about social commerce? Shopping's getting a little bit more streamlined on the social platforms. How do you see that impacting the buying cycle, or how businesses are going to, sell on the platforms?
Well, I mean, the biggest shift has been COVID, because it's shifted consumer behavior in a very dramatic way. I don't know the exact metrics, but if you look up, McKinsey did a study that COVID, and this was like 6 months into COVID, there was it was between 5 and 10 years of e-commerce growth in a matter of 6 months, because people couldn't go to the store or they didn't feel safe going to the store. And with our clients that are heavily reliant on retail and mass distribution, we even saw the innovation of retail and mass very quickly, and them adopting internal ad networks. And we had one client that their Amazon sales just went through the roof. So the market has shifted dramatically, and that human behavior is going to be tough to shift back. Like, human behavior is one of the hardest things to change. That's why in the beginning, I recommend really studying psychology and what causes people to do things. And I think that the future of retail and mass distribution is going to hold online. Does that mean that every store experience or restaurant or bar is going to close? No, but it is shifting dramatically, and there's going to be less of that interaction. And I think the companies that can adopt the online and also transform the offline experience will ultimately succeed.
Awesome. So I have the students reading 1 million followers. Can you give them an overview, pitch hook point to them, and kind of why that book's valuable? And by the way, I'm halfway through it and I love it. So anything you want to say to them on that?
For hook point?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to be successful in social media or marketing or any aspect of business, there's really 2 things you have to master. How do you grab attention, which is getting harder and harder because there's over 60 billion messages sent out on digital platforms each day. So you literally have less than 3 seconds to capture that attention. That doesn't mean you can't hold attention for a long period of time, because people talk about micro attention and all that. It does exist, but the micro attention exists from grabbing the attention. And why I know it's that is, like, I binge watch stuff on Netflix or podcasts. Well, it'll grab my attention for hours and hours. So your first job is, how do I stop somebody in a world where there's 60 billion messages sent out every day? Now, once you have their attention, your key is, how long can you hold it for? Because we're not talking about clickbait here and tricking people, because that phase is ultimately over. And the biggest contributing factor to your success, especially with social media, is the algorithms. And the algorithms have one job and one job only, and that's to figure out how to keep you on the platform longer, because that's how they make money. So the content creators, the advertisers that can, 1, get somebody to stop, and 2, hold that tension for a long period of time, will ultimately win. The same goes, offline as well. So the whole book is built off of that. And it's not just me that's talking about how we do that in our business. I have a friend that sold over $1 billion worth of product on social media ads. I have one of the top creative directors in the world that have worked with the likes of Nike and Adidas and Red Bull, breaking down their strategies. So fundamentally, it is the most important skill set that you can have in this new world that we find ourselves in.
That's awesome. Last question, and it's something that's kind of come up in their business projects that they're working on. You're an entrepreneur. Can you talk about that work-life balance and what that looks like and feels like, and how you manage it?
Well, 1, I don't manage it very well.
Agreed.
It's and I'm not saying it's not important. It is important, and I work on it as much as possible. But you've got to understand that being an entrepreneur is different than working a 9-to-5 job. As I stated earlier, there's no right or wrong decision. It's a personal decision for every person. But being an entrepreneur, you're going to work longer than you would work in a 9-to-5 job. So you obviously need to find balance to sustain. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. Like some people, and I can't remember who, but they talk about this is the toughest sport in the world. And it is like business is a sport. And like the training, like people talk about Tom Brady at 43 doing these amazing things, but people don't look at like a Mark Cuban who's been doing this a lot longer, or Warren Buffett, and the amount of sustainability in your mindset, in your health that it takes to do it. So I think that having a plan in place is really important. I think one, surrounding yourself with a friend circle that is entrepreneurial based is critically important, because if you have friends that just work 9 to 5s and they're going out every night and drinking, they're not going to understand and support you in that decision. And I think having people that are going through this marathon with you is critically important. Also, choosing your partners who you date, in marriages and things of that nature is critically important of people getting that. And then finding ways to stay healthy from a mindset and a body perspective. I invest a tremendous amount of money and time into developing my mindset. I have advisors, I have therapists, coaches, all these things that I tap into for that perspective. Exercise, diet is important as well. So that's kind of how I found it. And for me, it's a never-ending process of getting better at that. But over time, you will develop, skill sets and things of that nature to be able to handle it.
Love it. I appreciate it. Well, that's all the questions I had. I think you shared a ton of knowledge, and I appreciate you taking your time. I know you're busy. Thank you for giving back. Thank you for the books. I will send you feedback from the students so you guys have it. And yeah, if they have follow-up questions, I'll shoot that to you guys as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And if the students enjoy the book, I mean, the one thing I could ask is just going to leave a review on Amazon. Always helps.
Yeah, I'll make sure they do that, especially to thank you for taking your time. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.